You're listening to Force Majeure, an actual play Star Wars podcast. My name is Adam and I'm your host, and today's episode will be brought to you after these words from our sponsors.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there were still stories waiting to be told. Chronicles of the Crimson Corsair is an actual play holocast using the Caverns and Crate Dragon system. Set in a time of magic and monsters on a world lost to the mists of legend, Chronicles of the Crimson Corsair follows a group of emergent ensorcelled as they try to survive the worst the terrible Beskar Dominion can throw at them, and maybe, just maybe, make a little profit in the process. So if you like danger, excitement, great stories and memorable characters, you might just like Chronicles of the Crimson Corsair, available wherever you get your holocasts. Just search for Crimson Corsair, hit that subscribe button, and get ready to join the adventure.
Hello everybody and welcome back to episode 13 of the Coldfire Chronicles. My name is Adam and I am the GM for this story, and I am joined around the table by...
Hi, I'm Mim. I play Lassa. She is a human sentinel artisan. Her emotional strength is her curiosity, but her weakness is obsession.
Hi, my name is Ed Fortune. I play the character of Oberon Brick. He is a human hunter-seeker. His emotional strength is justice, and his emotional weakness is cruelty.
Hi, I'm Ross. I play Agatha, a Morialan warrior aggressor colossus, whose emotional strength is his pride, but whose weakness is his obsession.
Hi, I'm Mikey. I play Jiren. He's a Chiss mystic advisor. His emotional strength is his enthusiasm, and his emotional weakness is his recklessness.
And before we rejoin our heroes, who, as you may remember, vanished at the end of the last episode, I think it's about time that we had a little talk with them about their morality and where we currently stand. I'm going to be starting off, I think, with Jiren. So, Mikey.
Hello.
So, as per usual with these discussions, I've been keeping an eye on what you've been doing and how you've been doing it and the dark side points you've been using throughout the course of the adventure so far since the start of Season 5.
Yep.
But again, I'm going to focus in on one particular incident to talk to you about.
I wonder which incident that's going to be.
Yes, quite. So, you are reckless as Jiren.
Yes.
That is your failing, your flaw, your hubris. And at the time that you drew very deeply upon the power of the orb, extremely deeply upon the power of the orb, before becoming lost in it,
yep,
you were at great pains to say that you were acting recklessly and Jiren was just acting recklessly, and that's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm.
However,
yep,
you had the orb with you.
Yes.
And when the creature was coming towards you and Lassa, and Agatha was looking around for which target to pick,
yeah,
you said, "Don't worry about that one. Go for the one on Oberon. I've got this."
Yes.
Now that doesn't strike me as being reckless. Maybe reckless as to the consequences, but that strikes me that Jiren was actually quite deliberate and calculating in that moment, that he was going to use the orb, he was going to see what happened, and his recklessness was that he didn't care what the consequences were. He was using it. He wanted to taste that power for himself.
Cool. I completely disagree. The entire idea behind this was we had how many things were going for us? There were 3 of them, right?
Yeah.
One of them was being taken up by Oberon. One of them needed to be done by Agatha, and one of them needed to be dealt with by either myself or Lassa. If Agatha would have focused on the one for us, then one of them would have ganged up on more than one people. And we probably would have had a problem because I think at that point they'd already attacked and they were scary. So I was not doing that from Joren's point of view, was putting confidence in Agatha that you don't need to worry about this. And the recklessness was the fact that the only thing he could possibly do to fight this thing would be to give himself the power to do so. So using the orb was entirely reckless. He's been telling people not to use it from start to finish, but we really didn't have much of a choice. So Joren from that point was essentially he wanted to stand to make sure that him and Lassa didn't die, essentially, because we don't have any combat skills. If Agatha would have stood up to on our side, then potentially Oberon would have died. It wasn't calculated because he didn't think that far ahead, but it was this is the only option I can think of. This was what I need to do to keep us alive, because we need, in situations like that, free combatants, and we didn't have them. Certainly when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking, oh, we'll do the power. I'll be honest, I was thinking, well, let's try that. That might be interesting and we may survive.
Okay.
He's not particularly, as you might have seen from all other situations, not particularly power hungry about anything. All he wants is to be thought of as slightly better than the cat on the ship. You know? He is group orientated. He has found his crew, and he was worried at that point that his crew were not going to survive because there were 3 of them. And that's why he used it. And that's why I said it was reckless. I mean, the problem with Joren is he doesn't necessarily think of consequences. So the consequences were not. I'll be honest. If the dice had rolled in more in his favor, he would have dropped that as soon as he had used it. But unfortunately, the dice rolled slightly badly in his favor, and he was taken by the dark side. But he didn't think that was going to happen. He thought he'd be fine. You know, because basically, I mean, the worst thing about it, I would say, is he thinks he's better than Prinkle because he thinks he can control it, and he doesn't think Prinkle can. So if we were going to go on a negative side, if we were going to go, what his bad thoughts on this is that because he can use these powers, he's better than Prinkle. And I think that's probably only a subconscious thing because he loves Prinkle, but he still thinks that Prinkle can't handle this and he can.
Okay. You also did draw extremely heavily on the dark side. You pulled more dark side points by, I think, 4 times more dark side points than anybody else.
Yeah, using the orb doesn't give you much of a choice, unfortunately.
It doesn't, no. So, your conflict is 14. That number, once again. So, if you can please roll me a d10.
So, remind me of the thing. If I rolled...
So, you roll a d10 and you minus that from your conflict.
Yeah.
If you get a negative number, then your morality goes up.
Yep.
If you get a positive number, then your morality goes down by that number.
I don't think I'm going to get a negative number, but thanks for the vote of confidence, Adam.
Did you get a 1?
I got a 1.
So your morality drops by 13.
Cool.
So what does that currently put you on?
Well, I was on 56, so my morality now is 43, which is fair enough. It's exactly what I expected, but Joren feels that was that was acceptable, to be honest, because he didn't think there was any way out of it.
Agatha, I'm going to move on to you now.
Hello.
So, Agatha, it sees himself as a bit of a bodyguard. I think that's something that you've tried to bring across through that characterization and the way that you care for the crew by trying to right some of the wrongs that happened since leaving the Costa Thabaran, putting yourself in harm's way. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, it's the role he knows, so it's the easiest thing for him to go to in a situation.
And I think it's also safe to say that despite the concern for Pyjak that kicked in at the end, basically following the events in the temple and the visions there, that there is also something of a relationship, a protective relationship between Agatha and Prinkle. Would you say that that's also a fair assessment?
Well, I think so. I mean, he started to trying to build a bond with the rest of the team, and the fact that Pyjak isn't there means he sort of needs to sort of focus that attention on somewhere else. Prinkle, yes, he's definitely got some affection for Prinkle, and I'm not going to pretend he hasn't, and I don't want to phrase this as like a completely objective thing, but in a sense, the useful thing that Prinkle had at the time, especially when he was talking to Prinkle as Prinkle woke up, was he wasn't getting in anybody else's way when he was talking to Prinkle, and he had just had an opportunity to get things off his chest. So yes, he's definitely got some affection for Prinkle, but it also meant Prinkle wasn't annoyed with him at that particular moment, or it didn't seem like it.
Okay. So the bit for you I want to particularly focus on is when you first left the temple and you got to the cliffside that was overlooking Vitara's camp, and it was clear at that point that the Mercy had gone, that Pyjak had almost certainly gone as well. There was clearly something going on in the camp, there was someone there. But instead of going in with the rest of the team, leading from the front, being there to take any threat, what you instead did was wander off and go scouting back on Pyjak's path, despite the fact that Agatha has no skills in that area whatsoever, that being a role traditionally taken by Oberon. You left the group, you went off on your own, not knowing what threats waited for them, not knowing whether or not Pyjak might have still been there, or Prinkle might have been there, or what had happened. You totally abandoned the rest of the group to go and look for Pyjak's trail. Now, I know at that point in time your emotional weakness was still nominally anger, but I'm going to consider it as obsession because this was clearly the seeds for that being sown. But that was you giving in entirely to that weakness of obsession and trying to find out what had happened to Pyjak.
I'd agree, but at the same time, because of what they just... it's difficult to say what they've just shared in the temple, given most of their vision wasn't actually with each other. But my feeling on Agatha is, while outside of any sort of force shenanigans, he's been pretty clumsy and not really socially with anything. When it comes to the force, he's actually finding this bond between him and the rest of the characters that defies his own explanation. And as a group, he trusts them. Individually, he can't get along with any of them, Lasser especially, but individually he trusts them, and they were focusing on... it wasn't simply Pyjak is gone, it's also we don't know whether he doesn't have the survival skills to know, are there footprints coming from this direction? Am I going to detect the signs of another fighter craft coming in? But to a large extent, he was looking at the perimeter and what else could be coming in from outside, any existing threats, and he was trying to protect all sides of the party rather than what might have been waiting for in the camp itself.
Okay, so his intention was really more then to make sure there was nothing from outside coming in while the rest of the group...
That was my thought process. I didn't think of what might be hidden in the middle of the camp that they might be looking for, beyond that point that the Coldfire's Mercy was gone, and at that point I wasn't really expecting anything to be still there for us, but if anything was going to be there, I was expecting it to be outside the camp rather than directly in the middle of it.
Okay.
So I was still thinking of it as sort of bodyguard role point of view, but yeah, the focus wasn't there.
So you weren't giving into this obsession to find out what had happened with Pyjak so much as wanting to make sure that there was nothing external.
That's my thing. Yes, he was definitely curious. He was definitely pursuing Pyjak because that's why he jumped down mountains and so on to get there as quickly as he could. But at the same time, he didn't want to go in alone. He's waiting for the rest of the party to get there. So I think for the most part, he trusted the rest of the party to go into the middle of the camp and find out what was going on there while he looked for threats around from the exterior.
Okay. Right. And you also use one dark side point. Your starting conflict is 5.
Okay. I forget with a D10. If it rolls a 0, is that a 10 or a 0?
It's a 10.
It's a 10. Okay. Is that a good number?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That means that your morality goes up by 5. It increases your morality from 41 to 46, I think.
I'm happy with that because he's not necessarily good. He's still not quite in harmony with the team, but he's doing better than he was. He's trying, which is novel.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to Lasser.
Hello.
Hello, Mim. Let's be fair here. The events on Port Haven, you have to bear a reasonable percentage of the responsibility.
Yeah.
You were driven by your need to take revenge upon the people behind Steve. You actively engaged in crime for the first time because you started this show as the only character that was legitimate, that was not a criminal. You were respectable, you were honourable, you had lines. And throughout the course of the last 2.5 seasons, you keep tiptoeing over and then kind of redrawing those lines. So you started off as legitimate, and then you became a criminal in the eyes of the Empire, but you still held yourself to that moral high ground. And then that went a bit further, and there was like slight dabblings around the edges by working with the Alliance, even temporarily, but again, you justified that, you held your moral high ground. You cannot deny now, I think, that Lassa has to surrender that high ground a little. Because even though the target of this were criminals, this was not a legitimate way to go about taking the vengeance you felt you deserved.
While all of that is true, she has a stubborn streak, and part of her very much still feels she has been pushed into this by circumstance. And whereas, as far as she's concerned, there are plenty of criminals out there who have always taken the easy way out and revel in their life of crime, she is just a hard-done-by person who, through absolutely no fault of her own, is apparently a Force-sensitive person, which means she's being persecuted, being chased, which means she's been forced into areas where she shouldn't have been to meet and be influenced by people that she shouldn't have been dealing with, and it has somewhat led down a tricky path. I'm pretty sure that half of her brain is blaming everything else, and I'm not sure the other half has quite caught up as to what has happened. The closest that it probably came to catching up was when the Empire attacked Port Haven, and she realised that this wasn't just, the Empire have put me in an awkward predicament by labelling me a criminal when I'm not, so now I have to deal with criminals. It's, we took action which has had really bad consequences. And even if some of those actions are because we've been forced to run and hide and preemptively protect ourselves and, try to avoid the Empire, which is really what she sees as more of a criminal organisation because they are deeply immoral and wrong. But yeah, that's probably the only point, as she saw the other ships and heard the other ships crashing down around her from being struck by the Empire, that she's like, we're not in the good place anymore, and this is going to be my life. And whatever happens, good or bad, the Empire's the worst, and now it's just survival. It's just survival. Good and bad is starting to lose a sense of authority in this area. It's a lot more grey than she expected. And she's an old woman, so she's used to seeing some grey, particularly when it comes to having to take work that might not be above board, but as long as nobody mentions it and it doesn't hurt anybody, everyone dodges a bit on their taxes here and there. This is consequences more than actions that she's worried about. The consequences have been bad, and that's what's starting to make her view herself differently.
And I've got that you used a dark side point. I think that's it. I think it's just the one from recollection.
She mostly avoids it, yes. Was that the crushing time?
Yeah.
Yes, that was a bit of a unique moment, but at least it wasn't against an organic person, so she's managed to keep herself. She hasn't had to deal with that. Machines are machines, people are people. And Jaren is starting to look a bit like both.
Your starting conflict is 10. So if you can please roll me a 10-sided dice.
10.
Your morality does not change.
She's a stubborn old bird, isn't she?
She is. She absolutely is. This is the only time your dice have come through for you as well.
Every time on morality, I am able to basically go, Lassa is very good. She spends a lot of time talking to herself and a lot of time convincing herself what's going on, because she's a very insular person who is comfortable in everything she's had to do, and she doesn't actively seek out to hurt people. It's very rarely she wants to do something just for the hell of it. There's always, this is dangerous, so we should stop it. This is broken, so we should fix it. These are bad people. We're going to have to run away. And what happens while we're doing that is not her fault. It probably helps that she's got, Jiren and Agatha and Oberon to go, well, honestly, it was going to go that way because look who I'm hanging around with. I think Jiren probably helps her a lot because when there is some criminal activity, he's so light-hearted about it. He makes it seem unimportant, really unimportant and unnecessary and almost a joke, which is why it's taken burning ships and screaming people to make her at least go, are we the baddies here?
No, you're just less bad than the Empire.
Yeah, maybe that's going to be it. Maybe as long as she can keep that in her mind that we're not bad because those people are worse and everything we're doing is to avoid them. Maybe that's the only thing that's keeping her sane and not traumatized by her actions.
And I think that means that your morality stays at 52. So yeah, 52.
Fantastic, yep.
And now, Oberon. There were many ways you could have approached this heist. There were opportunities you could have taken. There were other routes you could have gone down. You chose to lean on your family's name. And then not only lean on your family's name, but to lean on your own name when you found out that they were hunting for you. And as a consequence of those two choices, Port Haven has been destroyed. Now, many of the people there were criminals, but not everyone. There were fringes there were smugglers there were rebels there. There were all the people that try to get out of the sight of the Empire. And you knew your family's resources. You knew the influence that they have. You have repeatedly humble bragged about Grand Moff Tarkin and his ties to your family and the finishing schools that they run through places like the Orcal Collective for high-ranking military members. And while I'm not going to go so far as to say that Oberon knew that this would be the specific outcome, there has to have been some thought that this or something like this might happen, and you still pulled those strings, and this is the consequence.
So Oberon's mindset would be that there's a fine line between vengeance and justice, and he's trying to straddle them as best he can. There's a whole thing about pulling a tiger by its tail. It will eventually, you pull a tiger by its tail, it will attack. It's still a tiger. And this particular tiger is, to Oberon's mind, a greater threat. Now, he wouldn't make the ends justify the means argument because he sees where that leads. And he understands where that leads. But he didn't expect Port Haven to be destroyed. That's not a consequence and he's going to have a long think about it. There is an old part of Oberon that would have enjoyed that would have liked to have made that longer. And if it was a brick act of vengeance, the destruction of Port Haven would have taken days, not minutes, because they like to make people suffer. So, is he doing what he can? Has he done what he can? Yes. Has he done his best? No. Could he have done it better? Yes. Was he blinded by a need for justice? Yes. Was that vengeance? Probably. Was that cruel? No. Was it cowardly? No. Did he, in every opportunity, try and get the people out? Yes. He called in a bomb threat. Yes. He blew up the cooling systems. Yes. He tried to deceive and manipulate past people who were not directly in his path.
What I would say about calling in the bomb threat, there are other ways that threat could have been communicated that weren't putting on that mantle of the prodigal, knowing that they were looking for you.
And at that point, I will agree with you. That's cruel. That's a good point. That is cruel. That's cruelty. Because he's trying to hurt them that way. That works. That makes sense. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
because that was a conscious choice.
Yes.
Pretending to be Balthazar, I think, is legit, and that I'm not factoring in quite so much. Because yes, there might have been some pushback, but ultimately, that for me isn't the crux of what's caused all of this. It was not only wearing that mantle of the prodigal, it was wearing that mantle of the prodigal as a challenge and a threat to your family's holdings. You thumbed your nose at your family, and you have said yourself many times that the bricks respond. It is the fact of the insult, not the substance.
I'm trying to think if Oberon's blinded by this, and I think he's about to wake up again and have one of those moments, because his history is that he makes the mistake first before learning. And he doesn't really... At no point would he have wanted to cause the destruction of innocence, though he doesn't mind the fact that Port Haven's been destroyed. It was an evil and cruel place. But he regrets the fact that the Empire was the tool that did it, if you see what I mean. And that this is it. His family will always make things worse. No matter what you try and do, they will make it worse. So what can you do but fight against them? And how can you fight against them? How does one man destroy the Empire? And is he that about one man? The answer, of course, is no, he's not. No, he's absolutely not.
Your conflict, Ed, is 15.
Ooh.
You only used 2 dark side points, but the consequences of your choices are weighty.
Dark side, here we come. Dark side, here we come.
Can you please roll me a d10?
That's 10, Adam.
You have not yet fallen to the dark side. You are within spitting distance, because that puts you on 33.
Genuinely, how low does it have to be?
It needs to be 29.
Wow, that came very close. I mean, yeah, he did blow up an entire Shadowport, though he's not entirely to blame for that because it's the Empire. I feel that's a little harsh, but on the other hand, I'm down for it. 33. That is nothing. Thing is, he made a slight gain last time.
Yeah.
Cool. So what you're saying is that if I spend some dark side points now,
then come the next check-in. Yeah. That is a bridge we might have to cross in play, depending on what happens.
He's been so trying to be good.
I mean, mostly he has, but unfortunately, as soon as you invoked the bogeyman of your own name, knowing your family's predilection for disproportionate response.
Yeah. To be honest, I was expecting a cool lightsaber fight. I wasn't expecting a Star Destroyer. I mean, there's an over response and then there's an over response.
Well, it's who does your family know?
Yeah.
Because again, you have discussed that their friends aren't the Inquisitorius. They aren't the ISB. It's the Admirals and the Moffs that they're buddy-buddy with.
It's the fleet. Wow. There's forming a wedge between your family and then there's summoning a giant spaceship-sized wedge.
Yeah. Before we rejoin the narrative, we are going to roll a fresh destiny pool, I think. So can everybody please roll me a force die?
That's 1 light side from me, ironically.
And that's 1 dark side for Lassa.
And that's 1 dark side from me.
And that's 1 dark side from me.
And it's 2 light side points from Agatha.
Huh.
Who'd have thought it?
That sets our initial destiny pool to 3 light side, 3 dark side. There is presently, miraculously, balance in the force. Before we rejoin our heroes in their current circumstances, we're just going to step back a few minutes to those last fateful moments on Port Haven, as they desperately seek to flee, and as Lassa finishes installing her special project, the bespoke force-powered hyperdrive device, leading up to Jiren hitting the button. And we're going to focus in on that engine room and focus in on Lassa. So yes, Lassa, what does that look like? What's going on in engineering in these vital, fateful few moments?
As she'd finished installing and tweaking the orb into the hyperdrive, into the ship itself, the last part was to accept that to make this really work, she needed to make a force connection to it. And almost against her own will, riled up by the fact that she'd just spent the last few minutes desperately trying to ignore what was happening outside the ship, just to make sure that she got this right, because it's a Hail Mary, this is a do or die. She wasn't completely sure if this would work or not. But the final part, it was almost as if everything else died away. As she placed her hand on the orb, and her hand on the switches and the buttons to try and regulate and be ready to shut this down if it looked like it was going to kill everything, she knew that she had to put a bit of herself into it to make sure that this went where she needed to go. And as she began to let the force flow through her in that annoyed way that she does, because she doesn't talk to the force or work with the force with respect, it's mutual antagonism. Like, you know, some people are kind to their donkeys and some people beat their donkeys and some people take their donkey by the head, stare in the eyes and go, you and I are going to finish this and then we can go our separate ways. I don't like you and you don't like me, but by Jove, we're going to do this. But there's that level of antagonism to the way she wields the force, and she accepts that she does now. And there's very much a, right, I will give you everything I've got, and you're going to give me everything you've got, and we're going to get out of here. On the count of 3, 2, 1. And she focuses on the idea of everything being connected, like Pyjak had always said. And if everything's connected, then the shortest route from A to B is 0. And if she thinks hard enough, she doesn't really need to do the maths of where this hyperdrive is going to take us in space. She just has to tell it where it already is and push. And as she's focusing on the orb and the machinery, she feels part of the system and she can understand that, and she's able to access what I believe has been called before the Nexus. So without fumbling through hyperdrive and jumping through all this excess space, I'm already connected from A to B, and we can just pass through the connection that the Force makes between all things. But rather than just her, or just her and the thing she's holding, she gets to feel the connection to the orb, to the hyperdrive, the wires going into the whole ship, the system stretching around the entire vehicle, so that this whole thing becomes part of Lassa. She isn't just engineering the ship, she is part of the ship, and she can see the green energy from the orb flowing through everything, almost encapsulating the ship. To her, whether anyone else sees anything like this, she doesn't know, but she can see this green energy. And then she sees where she's going. She knows that there's only one place they can go. It's the place they always used to run decades ago, and that's the stopover. And with just one push, she knows we can make it. And she just screams over the comm, now, and waits for them to push the button so that she can carry them through.
There is a moment of absolute stillness when the chaos of outside ceases. The chaos of inside the twitch ceases. You feel, all of you, like you are poised on the precipice, looking down, and the roller coaster is just about to drop. Then there is nothing. And then there is something again. And this something, this sudden feeling of being once again in the world, once again part of reality and the Force and everything and physicality, hits you like a punch in the brain. You all suddenly start to breathe again. You hadn't realised you were holding your breath. It's just that for that second that stretched on for forever and at the same time was no time at all, you must have been holding it. And into that blessed silence suddenly, Alarms are going inside the ship. The crackle of fire from the navigation panel. The blurting, flashing lights letting you know that Oberon's plan to dump all of the fuel in one glorious final charge out of the atmosphere of Port Haven has worked perhaps too well, and the Twitch is running on absolute fumes and momentum. The life support system starts to spark. You find yourself in a star system. Judging by the constellations around you and the positions of the stars, those of you who have never been here before can only assume that you are somehow, inexplicably, instantaneously, on the far side of the galaxy from Port Haven, because nothing is in the places that it should be. And this wasn't hyperspace, that comforting drop into the shimmering azure hyperspace lanes that feel so comforting now. That place of safety where you can just leave the ship to do its own thing. No, this was something more, something different, something wrong, something painful. What you did, you should not, you could not have done. It is impossible, and yet it happened. You are heading towards the centre of this solar system. A vast blue giant sun has expanded and swallowed the first few planets in this celestial orrery. You can see a rocky planet close to the sun that has been scoured of all features by the solar flares, and in a short period of time, galactically speaking, will also be swallowed by the sun as it continues its expansion outwards. You can see asteroid belts where the gravitational forces have torn other planets to pieces. There is a vast purplish gas giant. It was probably red or orange at one point, but the colour shift that's being caused by the light coming from this sun has cast it in a very peculiar series of shades. You'd swear that it was possibly even Tabana gas or something similar, but with the sensors being out of whack with the light shift, it's too hard to say exactly. There is one moon remaining orbiting this gas giant, and it is a big moon. And you can see as well that the spinward side of the moon that is following the orbit of the planet is smashed to pieces as asteroid after small bit of space debris slams into it and impacts or bounces off or chips away yet more of the moon. And on the back side of the moon, sheltered by the spin, because it appears to be tidally locked as well. The moon is not rotating itself on its axis. It is tidally locked to the planet. And on that back part of the moon, that safe part of the moon, you can see lights. There is a structure there, a bustling conglomerate of landed ships that have then been built into what was possibly an old Tabana gas mining station, which was possibly built into an old salvage and wreckers yard. There are ships landed on landing pads around here. There are vast salvage yards, visible even from space, where old ships have been junked and where cargo containers have been dropped. Some of these ships are relatively modern, some of these ships are ancient, and you can just about make out these cracked and battered hulking frames in configurations lost to the galaxy for thousands of years, dating back to the old Republic and beyond. Further out towards the very edges of this solar system there is another gas giant, this one a greenish tinge, with a number of very, very small moons that again there are strange glints from as the light reflects weirdly from whatever structures and substances are on that moon. And then very, very far out, way on the bleeding edge of the solar system, there is an ice planet hurtling around the sun. You are close, relativistically speaking, to the moon around the fourth planet in Tamdu 4, where this station is. Lassa, this feels more like coming home to you than you have felt since that vision of the witch. This is the stopover. A haunt of fringers, smugglers, long-distance hauliers, a place where people who are just trying to live an honest life without being interfered with by the authorities, be they the Empire, be they the Republic, can come and rest and refuel spiritually and literally. Players.
We can hear, as you know, there is the sound alarms as numbers of dozens of systems just start failing around, and just over the comms, in quite a cheerful voice, Jiren says, "This is your captain speaking. I don't want anybody to worry, because soon all of the fires will go out, because the life support is about to stop. I'm probably beating around the bush. What I really need to say is, Lasser!"
So Lasser's feeling a little bit woozy from having done this. This is the most connected to the Force she's ever felt, and it was somewhat an overwhelming experience, feeling like a ship very briefly. Can I ask, is there enough energy left in this orb and enough willpower for me and either the orb or my own life force to... is there enough of a connection to me and the ship left for me to be able to make life support keep going, and I will fuel it personally with my own reserves of energy if need be, just to get us to limp to the planet's surface? I will take any damage I can, but if I can be the fuel for this ship for just a couple of minutes to get us to the surface, then that would be me done and I'd be happy.
Yes, I would like from you a discipline test. Discipline or resilience. Your difficulty is 3 red.
You are kidding me.
No.
Oh my gosh, because I've got 2 green against those 3 red.
There are 3 light side points in the bank, and in fact I'm going to flip a dark side point.
It's already hell on toast, Adam.
To reflect the damage that the ship is suffering.
Okay, so I'm going to use one of those light side points to turn one of those green into a yellow.
Okay.
To give me a shot. If that's all right with everybody.
Yes.
Do it.
Yep.
It's probably the last roll you'll do, so why not?
That's what I'm thinking. And have I got anything else?
I'll let you roll your force rating as part of this.
Thank you. So I've got skills in being able to increase system strain thresholds of the ship and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that maybe I could get a boost from that, because I can already use the force to...
I'll give you an upgrade.
Oh, so that becomes 2 yellows.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Seeing as she's using the orb to do this, would she be using the orb's power as well?
Don't know if there's anything left. We'll see.
There is. It has been recharged to 2 force dice in there at the moment, which you can draw upon, but you have to use whatever it gives you.
Okay. So that's 4 force dice I'd be rolling then. So fully seriously then, so that's 3 red versus 2 yellows from using my force abilities to look after a ship anyway, and then 4 force dice, of which 2 are from the orb and I have to use.
Yeah.
Alright, so I'm rolling those 2 force dice for the orb first, and that's 1 light and 1 dark side, so perfect balance.
So you will take a conflict and you will take a strain, because you have to use that dark side point. I'll mark up your conflict if you can mark up your strain, and then if you want to make your discipline or resilience test.
I'm going to use... well, it doesn't matter, they're both the same. So let's use resilience, because I am trying to avoid pouring my entire life into the ship to get us to the planet, but just enough to get us there. Okay, so that's 2 dark side points. But that's 2 success and 1 threat. So I could use one of those dark side points to get rid of the threat, couldn't I?
You can. Yep. It will cost you another strain and a conflict, but yes, you can.
I'll do that, because even though my intentions are quite good, I'll pull on anything, and I don't really. She doesn't quite believe in a dark and a light side. It's motives, but she'll take that. So that removes the threat and just leaves me with 2 flat success.
And a light side.
Oh yeah, you have a light side. So you can just use that light side to cancel out the threat and not have to draw upon the dark side that second time.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'll do that then. Of course. And then, because I think it is thematically appropriate, once we make it, she's going to go woozy and collapse.
So what happens is this. You pour your life force into this ship. And for your perspective, Lassa, you become one with this vessel. You can feel every part of the ship as your spirit suffuses it. And it is but a thought for you to turn the life support system back on. It is but a thought for you to put the fire out on the navigation panel. And then you lose yourself in the orb and the fuel. You have given it just enough juice that when Oberon makes his piloting test, because I'm going to need a piloting test, to land this ship, he can do that. There is fuel. There are consequences for you as a result of this, however, Lassa.
Of course.
The first is that you're going to pass out.
Yep.
The second is that you're taking a crit, and the successes you roll subtract from what the plus modifier was from that crit. And you have resulted in, it is a single purple crit. It is effectively a discouraging wound, and what that does is that flips a light side point to a dark side point, which I think is probably the most thematically appropriate for what you're doing here, because it is not natural.
Yep.
But that is representing a small fragment of your spirit, your soul, your force, call it what you will, being burned as fuel to give your crew just enough of a chance to get to safety. The rest of you, you feel around you, you feel like suddenly Lassa is there, Lassa is everywhere, disapproving slightly and tutting. And then, Jaren, you see the fires on the navigation panel go out. Agatha, suddenly there's power restored to the gun turret that you're in, and the door that was trapping you in there suddenly opens again. You hear Prinkle shout from down the hallway,
I don't know what is going on here, but the life support's just kicked in again and the kettle is on. I did not even know the ship had a kettle. But it is on and it is brewed. What dark sorcery is this?
And Oberon, even though your fuel sensor is showing as empty on your control panel, you know somehow there is just enough in there to get you to land.
Oberon makes a leap of logic and he just says, no, and is absolutely horrified. There's this look of utter horror on his face.
Jiren turns and says, land the ship, and unbuckles himself and runs back towards engineering.
Agatha is likewise, since there's no threats outside, there's no TIE fighters in anything in his line of sight at the minute, and now that the door is open, I think he's going to aim for engineering as well.
Adam, I'm landing the ship. What's my role?
It's a piloting test, piloting space. I think it's going to be standard 2 difficulty. The difficulty is lining up with the weird tidally locked orbit of this planet and avoiding the asteroids that are in the way. Before you roll, I'm going to flip a dark side point, so it's 1 red, 1 purple.
Oberon is literally doing the most basic landing drills. He's trying to keep it as clean and straightforward as possible.
Yep.
That's 3 success.
And you do manage to land the ship. There's an awful lot of landing points here, all of which have refueling stations on, very few of which at the moment are in use, and the ones that are, it's freighters. Freighters, large and small, of a variety which I don't have immediately to hand, but I will let the listeners imagine what a display of freighters might be hanging. You know, there's some YTs and there's some C Corellians. There's almost certainly a Gatroc, because everyone loves a Gatroc. And you land oddly gracefully on this landing platform. And as you do so, and the magnetic clamps come to hold you in place for your own safety, really, given the dangers around here, a ray shield shimmers over the ship, protecting it from the spinning celestial debris that is still occasionally making its way around this side of the moon. The engines turn off, and the ship suddenly drops to that very, very low emergency power. Meanwhile, in engineering, Jaren, Agatha, you get there at round about the same time given your relative distances in this ship. Prinkle is hot on your heels. Lassa, how do they find you?
I got us there. We made it! And then she collapses. Thwack, hits her head on the way down. It's very messy. You can tell that she was just holding on to everything. But there's a hint, just a hint, of pride and a tiny bit of affection as she does it. And she's happy.
Jiren says, "Orb," as you fall, and goes for Lassa to try and stop her from hurting herself too much when in the fall, and to pump a heal almost immediately. And even if she's not hurt, I just want to roll.
Do I interpret correctly that was an instruction for Agatha to grab the orb and make sure it's not damaged or anything?
It's entirely up to you.
Okay. Because, I mean, my concern was Lassa, and Agatha's the one who's got least knowledge of this, so...
Yeah, Prinkle's just behind us. I want somebody other than Prinkle to get the orb.
In that case, yes. Agatha takes that point into account and goes for the orb with a blanket or immediate thing to wrap it with, because he's seen the effect if he touched it himself. Not that he's actually touched himself.
Yeah, you bundle the orb up in the blanket. The orb feels hot to the touch. Red hot to the touch. There's no, the blanket isn't simmering, and you suddenly realise as you're holding it that it is not a physical heat, almost. You know, you're not feeling it in your hands. It's not damaging the thing. It is radiating a heat that you feel in your soul. Prinkle hasn't noticed the orb. His eyes are only for Lassa, and he slides to his knees next to Jiren. As Jiren...
I'm going to use Knowledge's power. Oh, that's not good. I'm going to use Knowledge's power and try and put some healing into Lassa. But I rolled on my free dice, free dark side. I don't think this is a good place to do anything mystical right now. And I think as Jiren gets to you, he puts his hands on your forehead and on your shoulder to try and put power into you. But he pulls back because it's hot. It's there's static there. And I don't know what she did. Prinkle, I don't know what she did. I don't know what... Adam? My arm has a stim pack in it.
It does have a stim pack.
He didn't think about this because he doesn't think about his arm as being something that's there at the moment. He pauses, looks at his hand, which is already a little bit melty anyway, and it flips, and there is a syringe, and he just pushes it in and pushes a stim pack through to give you 5 wounds back. I don't know if you're injured, but it's there anyway.
I think what that will do is wake you up as suddenly you start to breathe again. And it's almost not the stim going in, but the touch of Jiren and Prinkle that knocks you out from being the ship Lassa and brings you back to yourself.
There's a big breath as she remembers that she has to breathe with her lungs and not with CO2 scrubbles. You know, there's a moment where she realises that she has to open her eyes to see and not read the data coming in from all the other sensors. And it's a real moment as she has to disconnect from so much information and such sturdiness, but also every nerve being on fire from being literally in space. like being a ship. It's very strange.
As you look up, you see something that you've never seen before. Jiren looks concerned. He looks scared.
Bloody hell, I must look like rubbish if you're looking like that.
At some point after we've landed, by the way, Oberon will have plugged the ship into facilities, so the power will come back on. Because that's the thing he knows to do that will help.
So I think that we leave this scene as the lights slowly start flickering back on from Oberon, basically using the docking facilities to start charging the ship back up. As Agatha holds the orb, as Prinkle and Jiren look down at Lassa, and Lassa looks up at Prinkle and Jiren. And then there is the crackle and pop as Lassa's secret project, this hyperdrive booster, crumbles into a greenish dust, leaving only the orb in Agatha's hands around the shell of what used to be the hyperdrive.
I didn't do that.
No, my love, for once, none of that was you. And Lassa starts laughing in relief at everything having worked just long enough.
And that is where I'm ending the episode for this time. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, as always, to my players for playing. You look after yourselves out there, and we will see you next time. Force Majeure is played using the Star Wars Force and Destiny game system by Fantasy Flight Games and Lucas Books. Our intro music for this season is Unholy Night by Kevin MacLeod, and our outro music remains Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale, both used with gratitude under the Creative Commons license. If you like the show and want to interact with us, we are on Twitter, we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, all of which are at Force Majeure Pod, though Twitter is probably where you're going to find us more regularly. If you enjoy what we do and want to support the show, there's 3 ways you can do that. The first is via our Patreon at patreon.com/forcemajeurepod. The second is by buying us a coffee at ko-fi.com/forcemajeurepod. And the third way is by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, anywhere where you can find us. We really like reviews. It tells us that we're telling the stories that you want to hear and helps other people find us. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.